This is Donald J. Trump. Mark Thompson is a huge loser. His show, very bad, soft. But if you're interested in crap and you're a communist, you can go to edge-show.com.
You're listening to The Edge with Mark Thompson.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. Great to have you here. We got bogged down in editing on an episode that's actually coming the next episode. It's still being edited and put together, although we're trying to do as little editing as we can on it, which is sort of one of the things that's bogging us down. But I'm really telling you that because I'm explaining why this episode's slightly delayed. But I want to tell you that we have a great visit with Michael Shure talking politics. And Michael correctly predicted that the government shutdown would end as a result of certain things that came to pass almost exactly how he predicted, and also a bizarre story about what's happening to the estate of the Las Vegas shooter, the mass killer who perpetrated that horror in Las Vegas. But what's going on with his estate is more than a little interesting, so we'll touch on that too. That's all with Michael Shure. Then, The Diary of Anne Frank is being performed on stage, but in a totally different kind of take. This group is, well, I'll let it be revealed in the conversation with Stan Zimmerman, the director, who will be joining us in the second segment. But Holocaust Remembrance Week actually happens this week, and we touch on sort of that remembrance. It's faded, sadly, in many places. And our conversation with Stan is, I think, about 15 minutes. We finish up with a cool conversation about a new app called AUDM, AUDM. It brings the world of audiobooks and audio to magazine articles and longer form publications like magazines. One of the founders joins us, and how he ends up on this show is not as a result of a publicist or anything like that. He literally is on the show because I have the app, this AUDM app, AUDM. And I was having an issue, and so I go on there and I go, hey man, I'm having an issue. You're talking to like some customer support type. Usually it's a bot, really. And it was clear to me it wasn't a bot, or it seemed like it wasn't a bot anyway. And I said, are you a bot? And he said, no, I'm actually one of the founders of the company. And I just thought it would be interesting for us to hear how he got this idea, how you launch a startup like this. He's got big publications involved, how he interacted and got these huge companies that are big publishing houses on board with his startup app is kind of a cool story. So anyway, we'll talk to him. And again, another fairly brief conversation. So a handful of cool conversations. They're all short, so it's a shorter episode. Next week is the long episode. Great episode, but we're in editing now, so I'll tell you more about that next week. Thanks for all the ways you support us. All of you are so great. You are helping to grow this community of people who listen to this show. We do some politics. We do different kinds of conversations with different kinds of people involved in different sorts of things. You want to support us? There's so many ways. Just share an interesting episode. You hear something good, send it on to someone. Tell them about the show. Subscribe. Subscribers are so important, and by subscribing to the show, you help grow the audience, and it helps keep us alive in the iTunes universe. 5-star reviews are so important on iTunes or anywhere else you have an opportunity to review us and give us 5 stars. So those are the ways that you can really make a difference. And if you want to make a financial difference, of course, if you're going to shop Amazon, not telling you to, just saying if you're going to, go through our website, edge-show.com. There's an Amazon link in every episode. You just click on it. It says shop Amazon or something like that. Click on that. We get a little piece of whatever you spend, same Amazon as you'd normally go to, but they just track the fact that you came through our website, so we get a little something spun off from whatever you spend. There's also a PayPal virtual tip jar there. You can use that too. Thank you, those of you who have taken a moment to send us $5, $10, $15, $20, whatever. Some have even sent more than that, but we're overwhelmed. Every dollar, as I've told you, will stay with the show. We run at a deficit, but that helps offset a little bit of that deficit. Those are the preliminaries. Let's get started.
This is The Edge.
Edge-show.com.
Edge lubricates as it lathers.
Edge-show.com.
Listen to the phone side, then listen to the edge side.
Edge-show.com.
Phone, edge.
Edge-show.com.
This is The Edge.
Here he is. He's our pal. He's forgotten more about politics than most of us will ever know. Michael Shure, everybody.
Hey, how are you? Great to be here.
Fan favorite.
Well, we have a government that's up and running, Mark.
Well, Michael, you had a very good week, and I'll tell you why.
Please tell me why. You obviously haven't talked to my agent.
You made a prediction on this show, and it was prescient in its accuracy. And here is what it sounded like.
I really feel that if the TSA walked off the job the next day, maybe even the next hour, the shutdown will be over. Because that would affect so many people, not just humans traveling to places they need to get to.
No, but businesses
as well. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Thank you very much.
And it was most likely that FAA-related hiccup.
It seemed to catalyze it.
And then it happened within hours, just as you said.
It did happen quickly, yeah. I was, even that morning, somebody tweeted something about it, and I said, yeah, this is exactly right, and it'll happen in an hour, and it really basically happened in an hour. As soon as you heard that the FAA Service Center in Leesburg, Virginia, was having staffing issues, and they had to close LaGuardia Airport, and then all of a sudden, the president's going to be speaking in the Rose Garden.
Yeah. I have to say, I thought the other possibility was the donors, wealthy donors, or the, if you want to think of it sort of as the ruling class, they might have applied pressure even to the Democrats. I didn't know where the pressure was going to go.
Here's one thing that I believe, and I think a lot of people would disagree with me, but I believe it because I think I've seen it a lot, is that the effect that wealthy donors have on politics once it's between elections, unless it's having to do with a specific piece of legislation, is not as profound as it is during an election. So the notion that wealthy donors en masse could call a bunch of members of Congress and say these things, it doesn't matter to them as much then. If it was on a piece of legislation, yeah, and obviously during an election, yeah, but I don't think that that's the kind of, in the Trump White House it may be different, but I don't see it affecting Democrats or rank-and-file Republicans in the same way.
The media plays it. It's Pelosi, Trump, this is a defeat. There were other things at play here, right? I mean, this was in a sense, a forecastable outcome. The wall didn't poll well. There was no political incentive for anyone to support it. And if they really wanted to, the GOP I'm talking about, if they really wanted to support a wall, they could have appropriated the funds while they were in charge of both houses of Congress.
Right, and that's true. And they would have shut down. They would have been in unison about opening the government up if both houses were controlled by Republicans. There's sort of a nuanced part of all of this, which is that I think that Senate Republicans felt empowered. They ran from the president, and everything is okay right now. And I think that's going to happen perhaps again. I predicted it would happen after supporting the Affordable Care Act, and it didn't really happen. It was a new president taking his first big loss at that time, and I thought maybe there would be a contagion factor. But this comes on the heel of losing the House by, losing 40 seats in the House. And I think it's going to start to matter. As the president's poll numbers go down, Republicans are going to see that there's some currency in going against him. You had 6 senators vote for a Democratic proposal to reopen the government, even though it failed. I think that's really what's happened here as well, which is a bigger loss for the president than losing to Nancy Pelosi in a shutdown.
In that spirit, I'm reading things like Trump's presidency is over. He's largely going to be ineffective from this point forward. That seems to overstate it a bit.
Yeah, he's the president, so his presidency isn't over because he's the president. His effectiveness is going to come back in some way, shape, or form. There are people that do listen to him and want him to succeed. The entire conservative Freedom Caucus in the House of Representatives, a very conservative bloc of Republican members of Congress, like the wall and they like what he's doing, and they want him to keep doing it. So he's not going away because of this. I mean, presidents take legislative losses and they take political losses and they rebound from them. What's going to bring this president down is something from without, not from within. And he did learn that it's going to be more difficult to do the things he wants to do, things that were very difficult for him to do before, even with both houses of Congress, more difficult now with an empowered and a unified Democratic Party.
I predicted that you're not going to hear about this in 3 weeks. Yours is in 3 weeks. We're going to revisit this, and if I have to, essentially saying if I have to declare, access to emergency funds necessary, I'm going to do it. I don't think that's going to happen. Do you agree with me?
Something is going to happen. They're going to push this down. Now, there's some logistical problems with that, too. I mean, it's due on the 15th. The Democrats have a retreat on the 15th. He's going to give a State of the Union. When he gives it, we don't know. There are lots of factors that go into the timing of this thing, but whenever it happens, he's going to have to come with something, or it's going to be another loss. So I don't know. The Democrats don't seem to want to compromise at all on this. But presidents get their way a lot, and he may get his way, not that it's a check in the memo box that says border wall, you know what I mean?
So you're saying there may be some sort of face-saving high ground for him in 3 weeks?
Well, I don't know about high ground. Something face-saving. The face he has to save isn't with America. It's with a swath of Americans who supported him, and so and with some members of Congress. So that's what this 3 weeks buys them time to figure out what that would look like. And already you hear the verbiage changing. You hear them saying, barrier. You hear them saying border security, and that was the domain of Democrats to say that. So they're not saying wall. And he's talking about when the president gave the Rose Garden speech, he said things like whatever you want to call it, barriers, fences, concrete, whatever you want to call it. Well, that's a departure from what he has been calling it and what got him to the White House. So I also think that the president and his team are really worried. They're worried about a primary. They're worried about Mueller. They're worried that Republicans in the Senate went against him, and not just the usual suspects. It was Johnny Isakson of Georgia. Mitt Romney's in town now. So there are reasons that he thinks they should re-examine this too. So it's a little bit like a timeout.
The other thing that bothered me, and we touched on this when this administration was just getting powered up, Jared Kushner. He was given tremendous responsibility over many, many things, from Mideast policy to Asian policy. It was insane given the fact that he had demonstrated no expertise in any of these things in the past. And essentially, and I'll just say this as an aside, Donald Trump runs this administration kind of like a small business, like a Trump property. And so his son-in-law and his daughter are just the ones that he farms out everything to, regardless of background and knowledge. Kushner's security clearance was slow in coming. It did come eventually, but he was being asked to handle a lot of these things I just mentioned without the appropriate security clearances. So you weren't going to get briefings on a lot of these things that you're supposedly running the administration on.
Right.
We learned this week that Jared Kushner's security clearance ultimately came not because he was deemed to not be a security risk, compromised by outside governments, but because it was an overrule from someone in the administration who could overrule that went against all these security analysts who recommended against his security clearance.
Right. That's why the name Elijah Cummings is one everybody's going to know in about a month, because he's the new chair of the Oversight Committee in the House. And he is somebody who is going to investigate this maybe as the very first thing he sinks his teeth into, and that committee sinks their teeth into. How it happened, why it happened, and maybe even leading to the revocation of that.
So you think it's possible that they could take it away?
If they find that it was ill-gotten, for sure. I mean, he might resign before that, or he might be forced to do something rather than relinquish his, or something that would implicitly relinquish his clearance. The other thing about Kushner and his wife, the president's daughter, is that the president's notorious for not trusting people around him until he has the people he can trust. He trusts Mike Pompeo right now. He likes Mike Pompeo. He didn't trust John Kelly. He didn't trust Rex Tillerson. So this is kind of a Kushner isn't as needed, as it were, for him right now. So he's a little bit more disposable for the president on some things.
This is also a big week because Mueller hands down this string of indictments. I'm talking about a string of indictments against Roger Stone. Stone is obviously someone close to the president, but his background goes all the way back to Nixon.
I think it's fair to point out, though, that he never worked at the White House for Nixon. He was 16 years old when Nixon won election, 19 years old during Watergate. I mean, this is somebody
really
who is
overstated.
Yeah, I think it's overstated, though he did grow close to Nixon when Nixon was in New Jersey in the post-presidential years. So he's a Nixon acolyte in that way, but not in the way that he was part of the Nixon administration. And I think that got blurred a little bit during a lot of the talk about it, but it doesn't really matter. I mean, he's somebody who admired Richard Nixon, who is a man who had to leave the presidency because he was about to be impeached and probably would have been convicted once impeached. He's someone who had to be pardoned so as not to go to jail. And Roger Stone is out there flashing the victory signs that made Richard Nixon famous, and he has a tattoo of Richard Nixon on his back, et cetera, et cetera. But this isn't about Richard Nixon. It's about Donald Trump, and these are about the dirty tricks that Roger Stone tried to do in order to buoy the candidacy of Trump, but also because he's such a vindictive guy. He's somebody who really didn't like Hillary Clinton with such a passion that he would do anything for anyone to see her not elected.
So these indictments I'm talking about, these were related to his WikiLeaks connections.
That's right, yeah.
So when you talk about dirty tricks, it's really in that context that he was pulling everything off.
Right, and trying to get WikiLeaks to tell him when they were doing releases, trying to control those releases, answering presumably to someone in the White House who was directing him to do that or suggesting that he he'd do that. He says it did not happen. If it did happen, it wasn't the president. He said in a TV interview he didn't do it, but if he did do it, he was directed by either Rick Gates or Paul Manafort to do it. I mean, he's clearly lied at some point. Whether it was to Congress or not, we don't know. And then there's Randy Credico, who's a right-wing talk show host, who says that he was threatened by Stone to make sure that he gave either false testimony or no testimony before Congress.
Yeah, all of that's wrapped up in this indictment. I saw Steve Bannon somewhere in all of that, even though he's not mentioned. So when we talk about the White House, I mean, you can always say that Trump directed him to do it, but let's put that aside for now. You didn't mention Steve Bannon in that list of people you just named.
Right. Well, that's because I wasn't even I wasn't listing this. I was going off of what Stone said in a televised interview.
I see.
But it could have been, I'm sorry. He said Steve Bannon or Rick Gates. I said it was Paul Manafort or Rick Gates. Steve Bannon or Rick Gates is what I believe he said. So, yeah, it was Steve Bannon. And I think that's very believable.
Right. I agree. I mean, it seems like that makes sense.
And that's how presidents generally work, but this isn't a general administration. The president isn't going to call a lackey or a flunky like Roger Stone and say, hey, will you do this? But the president either may suggest it to Steve Bannon, or Steve Bannon, who had some autonomy within the White House and the president's campaign especially, could have gone to Roger Stone and said, do this.
How damaging is this? It seems that Roger Stone sort of was drinking in the publicity associated. He said as much on the steps of the courthouse.
Right. I don't think that this is any more damaging than anything else. I think that it's just another piece to a puzzle that's being put together. And as you see all of these names and you see all of their corroborating and conflicting testimony that they've given to Congress and presumably to Mueller, then you're seeing a narrative that's been written now for over a year that is indicating that this White House knew something about what was going on with Russia.
There's a macabre fact that things associated with horrifying criminal acts and horrifying scenes through history, those things, artifacts and that sort of thing, they have value and they're auctioned and people buy them and, I don't know, they collect them. The Hitler memorabilia, the Nazi memorabilia.
The art of John Wayne Gacy, does that qualify?
Yeah, very much, very much. By the way, speaking of the art, apparently they've uncovered a bunch of Hitler's original, I think there are 2,000 different pieces and that stuff's of value. But in this case, I'm talking about the guns used in the Las Vegas attack. Apparently, a software executive in San Francisco stepped up and donated more than $62,000 to make sure that those guns would be destroyed and not live in some kind of infamy in this world of being auctioned. And first of all, some of this stuff wasn't actually used in the attack. It's from his residence where he had other stuff. Right. Technically, that's not necessarily evidence, and I think that's how that stuff makes it in. I thought it was somewhat unusual for this guy to preemptively step up and offer this money.
No, it's true. It also brings attention to something that I didn't know existed. I didn't know that subculture, although I find it totally believable. I didn't know it existed. But there's a fascination. I mean, you look at all the true crime fascination we have in this country, from shows that are on all the time to a network that is devoted entirely to true crime or the replication of old crimes. Yeah, I was driving the other day, and there's a huge billboard with a benign Ted Bundy smiling, the serial killer from the 70s and 80s, smiling, and Netflix is doing a show. And I thought, my God, that's awful to promote it this way.
Yeah, they're doing a whole series on it. It's a pretty hot series.
And it's fine to do it. It's probably interesting. But to imagine if you were related to somebody who he murdered, and he brutally murdered these women, and you see his smiling face there selling the movie about him, or the conversations with Ted Bundy recordings. It's horrendous.
Yeah, I actually, just apropos of that, watched the first episode, and it makes me uncomfortable. Now, admittedly, I'm not a true crime devotee, which sort of leaves me out of step with society right now.
Right.
But I do watch...
And out of step with a good friend of ours, a very good friend of yours.
No, it's true. Our pal does Dateline. But I did watch, I watched the Making a Murderer series on Netflix. And because, it gets into the zeitgeist and you just want to kind of be up on what people are talking about. So I watched the first episode. There are 5 more. But here's what's difficult for me. As you suggest, he didn't just murder these women. He did these horrible things. I can't even repeat it. I mean, it's just awful. real. It's the reason I don't watch Law and Order SVU. That's that sexual victims unit. I couldn't watch it. I tried one episode. It's too real. I know it's a TV show.
And that was Christopher Maloney and Mariska Hargitay, and they were so good on that show that I watched it, but because they were so good. But very often it was difficult to watch. But we've become inured to that, so that's not rough enough anymore. So you have to watch the true stuff because you got to get to the real victims and the real family members.
Oof.
Interesting.
Oof. Anyway, back to this collection of firearms. So here's a story, and just to round it off because I started talking about it. What happens is he dies, the guy who kills all these people in Las Vegas, right? And let's assume all of those firearms he used in the killing, those are evidence. So they're going to be locked in evidence lockers, and maybe they don't ever make it out.
Right.
But he had other weapons, and they're back at his house. And now he's got an estate. Remember, he had a lot of money.
Right.
So his estate goes to his mother, and his mother, she agreed to give the families of the dead victims the assets.
I see.
But the question was what to do with all of these guns he had. And it was then the executive, the software
so that
executive,
they weren't auctioned off in the money. Right.
So
and where did that money go, the $62,000?
The FBI will take control of the weapons and is assuring everyone that they'll never see the light of day.
Right. But you have to tell me where the $62K went.
Right, so hang on.
Is that in lieu of them having been auctioned off and that money goes to the families as long as they get destroyed? I like that story.
If the gunman's estate were to be divided up equally, each of the 58 families would receive about $24,000, with the firearms accounting for close to $1,100 a family.
So here's what I think. This is my guess, the value of all the weapons was $62,000. He's giving it to the families and then having the guns destroyed.
That does appear to be...
So that they will not have to be auctioned off and that money then distributed to the families. So nobody could ever own them again, but the same money is there.
That does appear to be the plan.
All right. Well, I'm glad I was able to wrap that up for you.
Yeah. Thank you very, very much.
All right.
You wrap up so much. You make sense of the nonsensical. You bring order to disorder. So you're off to Washington, D.C. after this?
I am, yeah. I'll be leaving Monday morning for the week.
What's going on in Washington, D.C.?
There's Congress. There maybe will be a State of the Union, but doubtful. And want to, make sure that we are on top of it at I-24 News and at the Edge Show.
Where do you stay? I could have Edge listeners maybe call your room occasionally.
I stay at a hotel in the capital area. Yeah.
Michael Shore, everybody. Hey, great prediction.
Hey, thank you so much, guys. Thank you. Great to see you, and we'll see you next week.
And now I'm joined by J. Elvis Weinstein, the original voice of Servo on Mystery Science Theater 3000, also a documentary filmmaker. His documentary, I Need You to Kill, is streaming now in all sorts of ways across the great streaming universe. And we'll both be joined by director Stan Zimmerman. Stan Zimmerman joins us, J. Elvis.
Fantastic.
He's a director, he's a writer, he's done a lot of stuff, producer, actor even, I think.
Actor, DJ, you name it. A man of all seasons.
This thing you're doing, though, it's The Diary of Anne Frank, which in and of itself is a powerful play. But you've cast it in an interesting way.
I did indeed. I had woken up one morning and I saw a CNN report about safe houses in L.A., over a dozen of them, hiding Latin families from ICE. And my mind, because I'm always thinking of plays, went right to The Diary of Anne Frank. And then all of a sudden I thought, what if I cast everybody in the attic with Latinx actors, and I could make the correlation between what's happening at the borders, because I've been feeling so helpless watching these families be ripped apart. Now they're saying over 2,000 families. They don't even know how many, and the kids don't know where their parents are. 2 have died in our custody recently, and this is a way of me to either have a crazy idea or really brilliant idea. And so I asked all my friends, and a bunch of them said, no, you have to do this now. I put aside the plays I was working on, and I thought it was important to do. We did it in the fall for 3 weeks, and there was a bit of a controversy because Breitbart and Drudge had me trending on the first day of rehearsal because they had reported that I had changed the play and made the Nazi characters ICE agents. And I'm literally doing a word-for-word production that was done in 1997 on Broadway with Natalie Portman as Anne Frank. Nothing has changed at all. It is just different actors in these roles doing these parts. And that seems to upset a lot of people, even Jews I've heard from.
Why would Jews be bothered by it?
Some people felt that it was demeaning her story. And as a Jew, we don't own suffering. And I always think when I don't know how to act in a situation, I think of putting myself in their shoes. And so that's kind of been my theme for the play, is that these people are putting themselves in the shoes of the characters of Anne Frank and the people that were in the attic for 2 years, and they could understand their story more by being in those shoes. And that's simply all I'm doing. I'm not saying it's a direct correlation. Obviously, you cannot compare anything to the Holocaust. That would be crazy. As a good Sunday school student, I know better. But there are certain similarities, and that I also wanted to provoke the conversation, because obviously, with the government shutdown over this wall situation, we have not solved the immigration issue, and people don't really want to talk about it, and hopefully this can provoke conversation. I also note that this play was produced in 1957, the original version of the play, in Spain, all in Spanish, with Spanish actors. So when people tell me, I say, well, can this play only be performed by white German people that are Jewish? Of course not. That would be ridiculous.
Dutch people in this case.
They moved to Holland.
Okay.
They were not born in Holland,
Gotcha.
actually. They were escaping the Germans and Hitler and thought they'd be safe in Holland, which, they almost made it. Anne Frank died 2 weeks before the camps were liberated.
I didn't know that.
Yes.
I mean, it's just
so many things I didn't know, even though, I had obviously learned about it in Sunday school and in school. A couple of things that Mr. Frank, Anne's father, tried to get them into America, and because of our immigration system and paperwork, he couldn't. So Anne Frank could be alive today, and a lot of people were saying on Martin Luther King's birthday, they're actually contemporaries, as is Barbara Walters. So think about all those people could be alive. Today, I also didn't realize, because we actually have a 15-year-old girl playing Anne. Usually they're played by much older college students or in their 20s. We have a 15-year-old girl playing that age. And during the auditions, I asked, what grade did you read the book or the play? And she said, I didn't know who Anne Frank was until this audition.
Wow.
And that kind of had smoke coming out of my ears. And then I realized this is more than a play, that could be an educational tool. And the great thing, because it was so successful in the fall, we brought it back, and we're now running at the Dory Theater until February 24th, hopefully longer, is that we've been getting so many kids, and I just got a call today about, can we do a whole show just for students from the L.A. Middle school. And I love the idea of educating these kids not only to this story, but also to theater.
Yeah, I would think that's a natural performance.
We're just a little band of people putting this on. I would love if anyone out there is involved in schools or in touring can help us, because there's so many people that I think this show could go to. We've had a couple of people from different festivals in Vancouver and elsewhere talk to us about bringing it there. I think a tour in Florida would be great. Even through Mexico would be really interesting.
The Diary of Anne Frank's been translated into virtually every language on Earth. It's a compelling story on its face. A family having hidden themselves in the upstairs area. That I think it's such a small area too. I've only seen photos.
Yes, I've actually been there and got to walk up those tiny steps. And the interesting thing is, in the theater, we do have a scene upstairs in a balcony, and you have to climb these very steep stairs, which are so similar to the ones in the attic. And it just happened to be the theater where we were at. But every day those kids, when they have to climb it for that scene, I tell them, think about this is what those actual characters had to do, those people.
Yeah, and it's that Anne Frank house, which is in Amsterdam. Mm-hmm. I was in Amsterdam about a year ago, and I was there for 3 days, and I could not get tickets to the Anne Frank house. It is packed. That's why it's odd that degree of demand to get into the Anne Frank house coexists with what you're talking about, which is, your lead actress wasn't even aware of the Anne Frank story.
Yeah, and they just did surveys. New York Times did a study last year, and millennials, 61%, didn't know what Auschwitz was. And in Canada, over half of the survey couldn't name one concentration camp. So obviously we need to educate on this. Past Sunday was very emotional for us. It was actually Holocaust Remembrance Day, and we had a talk back after the show. We had a 96-year-old survivor come speak.
Wow.
And that was extremely intense and wonderful that he could share his story. But we also were going to have 2 other people that were survivors, and one of them literally is on his deathbed, and the other survivor had to go spend time with him. So it's like the sands through the hourglass, you can just see them. We're left with so few people that were eyewitnesses to it, and that's why something like this play is so important.
The other thing that's odd to me is that, remember, sort of one of the things you hear around the Holocaust is never forget, never again.
It's
never
Elie
again.
Wiesel. And
never again and never
quote,
forget. Yeah. And it sounds like we're culturally forgetting.
It's very easy to, as we go on in our, Instagram, Snapchat world, to just move on to the next thing or swipe left or right. But certain stories we have to, or we will repeat them. And that's why it's so important. But, people come and they think it's just going to be this really heavy piece. But when you get 8 people living in a space, there's a lot of funny things that happen as well. And people are kind of surprised when they are laughing during the play, too. But you can't help that. And there's flirting and kissing. And
that's why this document has survived so long, is because this was this girl who was so full of life and so sort of both an old soul and a young soul simultaneously, and
so profound at that age. Some of the words she says, and to me, it just reminds me of all the kids from Parkland when I first saw them speaking, and I was shocked at how eloquent they were, and they were drama students. But then it got me thinking, like Anne Frank, and we, sometimes don't give credit to kids. They can see things pretty clearly and can be quite eloquent, and it's great to be able to celebrate her words and then her words continue. This version that we're doing, they commissioned a new version in the late 90s because the father of Anne Frank was in charge of the script, and there were certain things he did not want in there. So the new writer in 97 went in, and she talks about having her period, about fighting with her mother, not liking her mother, which is a very teen girl thing. And looking at girls and girls' bodies developing, and which is all very real of a teen girl writing in a diary. So there's a very profound effect, but I love this version of it because it actually shows a real teen girl.
How did the Diary of Anne Frank survive the Holocaust?
So they were captured. Someone had tipped them off, and the Nazis came and took them away. And then the people that were hiding them, Meep, who was the character in the play, found the diary and kept it. And the father is the only survivor. And he came back not knowing that, that the diary or anything would be there. And she gave him the diary, and he started reading it and realizing that he had something here, and gave it to a friend and said, do you think people would be interested in this? And I was like, no, we need to publish this. So, he went through editing it, and because back then, obviously, there were certain things you just didn't talk about.
The play is in performances through what date?
February 24th. It's just Fridays and Saturdays at 8 and Sundays at 3. I think we only have 9 shows left. 2 of them are almost sold out. We'll start adding more if people want to come, or if anybody hears us and wants us to somehow bring a group, we will figure something out. This is just too important not to get out to different people, or if anybody has any ideas of how to get us to different areas to show this story.
It's in an intimate space in Hollywood called the Complex, the Dory Theater at the Complex.
Very cute. It's just 50 seats, and I've been doing a couple of shows. You just saw my last show, Yes, Virginia, there, that we closed December 30th, and a week later I brought this back, so I've been a little nonstop with plays. But
yeah, if you want to reach Stan, or if you want to reach out to the play in any way, to comment or to that otherwise suggest group of educators or whatever, reach us here, and then we'll connect you with Stan. So it's edgewithmarkthompson at Gmail, edgewithmarkthompson@gmail. Where do they get tickets?
brownpapertickets.com. I know we're going to be seeing you in a week or so at the play. I can't wait to hear your take on this. And there's a documentary filmmaker that is following this whole journey of this play. And I might add the last performance, the 24th of February at 3 p.m. is actually going to be a Gilmore Girls Day. I wrote on the show and produced on it, and 2 of the actors from Gilmore Girls will be performing in it. So we're going to have a bunch of people from Gilmore Girls. If there's any Gilmore fans out there, it will be a special performance and get to see some of your favorite actors.
That's
That's our closing night, the 24th at 3 p.m.
Great. Good stuff. The Diary of Anne Frank in Hollywood, and it's brownpapertickets.com.
Yep.
Thanks, Dan Zimmerman.
Okay, talk to you guys later. Thank you.
Good luck. Wow.
Did you just call him Dan Zimmerman at the end?
I said Stan.
Oh, okay. No, I think it was thanks, Dan, and I heard.
Oh, yeah, I said thanks in the stand. You thought it was
yeah.
The Holocaust is one of those things, man. I'll tell you what, I just can't. He referenced just in passing the fact that they were trying to get into the U.S., as so many Jews were at that time.
Right.
And, I mean, we oftentimes talk about great presidents and great administrations, and FDR is spoken of as a great president because he was. But one of the awful things about FDR's administration is that he essentially
turned away shiploads of Jews.
Consigned a bunch of Jews. I mean, people died because of him. Jewish people. So, the Holocaust just has all these different pieces to it that are just all so sad and yet also uplifting. That Holocaust Remembrance Day, you're reminded of the people who did risk their own lives and did risk their own reputations and did extend themselves to protect Jewish families and Jewish people. It was, in a way, a reminder that there is great humanity out there. Not to be too heavy, but it just really was, it was sobering because I went through a whole, I must have, you get caught on Twitter about anything. And then this is particularly moving, and it was just, I watched a bunch of stuff and I thought it was quite impressive. All right.
So go see that play as opposed to I saw a terrible production of Diary of Anne Frank. It was so bad that when they came back from intermission, people were screaming, "She's in the attic."
Come on. How inappropriate is
Classic
that?
jokes, people.
Love it. Love it.
Hi, how are you? It's Arnold Schwarzenegger. I want to thank you for supporting Mark Thompson here on the Edge Radio. Fantastic show with all the jokes and J. Elvis, and all the commentary and the politics and the bullshit. You can listen to this little pageant on iTunes or Stitcher, or you can just go to the damn website, edge-show.com.
Ryan Wegner is with us from AUDM, AUDM. What a cool app this is. And honestly, I just discovered it. I subscribe to a lot of these magazines, The Atlantic, New Yorker. I have a bunch of magazine subscriptions. At some point, I was served in my email box you should check out this app. It's a chance to listen to some of these articles. And some of these longer form articles, you don't have time to finish at the house and you want to continue in the car or wherever you're going. And it's sort of like an audiobook, but it's just the article and from all these different magazines. But it's actually really good. And I've gotten sort of into it. I thought, well, how did they come up with this? And who are the founders? And might it be an interesting conversation? So we'll find out. Ryan Wegner, the co-founder of AUDM. Hi, Ryan.
Hi, Mark. Thanks so much for having me on.
I was just telling everybody that I have a couple of magazines that spring to mind, Atlantic, New Yorker. I don't know which ones. You can tell me, how many magazines are there that you offer this service with?
At this point, it's a couple dozen. Those big names in there, like the New Yorker, the Atlantic, Wired, Vanity Fair. I'm sure many of your listeners are familiar with the great work that they do, so we're proud to be working with them.
I want to learn a little bit about how this startup launched. You identified some need, and I guess you put together the building blocks of addressing that need. But how did the idea come to you, and then how did you go about executing on it?
So my co-founder, Christian, and I, we were batting around a few ideas. And this was something he brought up, just sort of a early idea of what this could look like. And I immediately gravitated towards it. And we both felt really enthusiastic about it, especially me, because I had recently moved to LA and was learning what it was like to spend a lot more time in my car and missing out on a lot of the articles that I used to love reading. So for me, this was just something I wanted in my life, and the same for Christian as well.
You guys were Columbia University grads, is that right?
That's right. We graduated from Columbia
in
2007.
Columbia's in Manhattan, so you're like used to public transportation or whatever, where you've got magazines or reading materials with you, and you don't have to worry about driving. You can just read while somebody else takes you there.
Exactly. But what's interesting is that a lot of our users use AUDM on the subway because as those trains get more and more crowded, you don't really get to sit anymore. And I think with AUDM, getting through those articles just with a phone in your pocket and headphones in your ears is pretty great.
I get it. So, Ryan, you and Christian, you started kicking stuff around.
So in the earliest days, we were just thinking about a way to potentially have the web read to you, whether that was blogs or, short articles. And then the idea morphed into something where we wanted to try and bring the best journalism that's out there, these in-depth, well-reported pieces that have long shelf life. A lot of the articles we have in the app, you could listen to a story from 2013. We have articles from the 1800s in Autumn. And that's where we started to feel like, hey, this is a real opportunity. Let's take this amazing journalism, wed it with the best narrators, best voice actors in the industry. And that, after a lot of research, turned out to be a group of audiobook narrators who we work with and make that product a reality. So that's what we did.
And I have to say this, I am not one of the narrators. I am not trying to be one of the narrators. I didn't bring Ryan on because I'm thinking, well, it's a good way to curry favor and get a narration gig. No. So I've got nothing to do with this company apart from being an end user. So you decided, once you had this elite crew of narrators in place, you have to then take these magazines and these long articles and oftentimes turn them around quickly, because while you say things are evergreen, there are a lot of things from some of these publications that you mentioned, Wired, New Yorker, whatever, that don't have a long shelf life necessarily. They may pertain to things that are going on right now.
Definitely. So we've gotten a lot sharper with our audio production work over time. And to give you an example, our head of production was actually awake at 3:45 this morning working on an Atlantic story. It was a 10,000-word piece. I think we turned it around in about 5 or 6 hours, which might be a new record for us. And then it's been live in the app since this morning, West Coast time. So we are able to move pretty quickly now. And that speaks to the quality of the narrators that we work with, who are able to take these articles with complicated prose and able to turn around a beautiful product. We also work with a team of great audio engineers who do a round of quality assurance on the article. And so it really just speaks to the talent of the people that we work with, that we're able to do something like that.
Well, you sound like a well-oiled machine now, but I have to assume that you had growing pains and trying to get up and running was not necessarily that easy. You're a Y Combinator success story.
Well, we're very proud to have come out of Y Combinator. It was an amazing experience.
Tell everybody what Y Combinator is, those who may not be familiar with it.
So Y Combinator is a startup accelerator based in the Bay Area, of course. They have invested in a lot of the companies that you have heard of, and they've done very well because of it. For example, Airbnb, Stripe, Dropbox, pretty amazing businesses like that.
So you go to Y Combinator with this idea, and they evaluate it and decide if they want to help in funding it.
Exactly, yeah. And actually, when we applied to YC, we were already live. So our app was available. We had a small roster of partners at that point, and they really helped us get to that next stage.
Did you launch to that first stage before you got to Y Combinator for less than $200,000?
Yes, definitely. We bootstrapped pretty hard. We had some amazing publishers take a chance on us, like the New York Review of Books, ProPublica, the Atlantic. They were all among our first partners. We got very lucky in that sense and really value those relationships.
And how does that conversation go down? Do you call the New Yorker and go, hey, it's Ryan Wegner. We've got a great idea, we think, and we'd like to talk to you about it?
Well, more or less, that is how it happened in the early days. Before we launched the app, we had sort of a beta version that we shopped around with the smaller publishers that we work with. And, we're able to drum up enough interest that once we got that first partner, then the next 5 came on, and then the next 5 after that. And they've come in quick order since then. And now at this point, we have more inbound from publishers than we can handle. So it's pretty great.
What's the user base goal for Autumn? What would make you happy if X number of people used it, or is that the way you measure your success?
I mean, in some ways, sure. Obviously, we want to grow our customer base. We want to appeal to as many different types of users as possible. And that means branching out from what we're doing right now. So, the goal is to become the destination for great audio storytelling. And that can take a lot of different forms. So for us, it really is about growing the appeal of the business by expanding our offerings. And, what that looks like, it's hard to say. In the near term, we're just going to keep adding more partners and continue to bring this great long-form journalism to people who really care about it.
There's something that you're talking about that I've read about, at least you're talking about, and that is there'd be something on websites when I read certain pieces, or it would appear next to certain articles, and it would offer the opportunity to click on a tab, in effect, or something like that, that would send a message to you guys at AUDM. It would say, essentially, hey, I'd love to have this be included with audio narration.
Yeah, and right now that's our support channel that gets all that type of inbound from customers who are asking for a specific article, and we really welcome that. I mean, there's so much content out there. We love it when our customers say, hey, this article, I would love to hear this article in audio, and it could have been one that slipped under our radar. So and certainly I think the next step is building an easier way for our customers to do that, to quickly spot an article and for there to be a quick and easy form to fill out so that we're notified as soon as possible.
It costs $7 a month?
That's right.
I didn't realize that. I thought it was less money. I may have to reevaluate.
Right. Well, hopefully that's not enough info for you to cancel at this point. So.
No. I like it. Is it available on both iOS and Android?
Right now, it's only iOS. We're in the final checklist right now with the Android app. So hopefully, worst case scenario, it's live in the next month or two.
Now, that seems like a huge audience, the Android market. But why did you set up and go first with just the iOS?
It's a good question. We led with iOS because I think the assumption was our demographic would fall more into the iOS audience. The truth is, between the two of us, Christian is technical. So he wrote every line of code in our app for the first 2 years of our existence.
Wow.
So for him to bring on a whole another project like an Android app, it wasn't in the cards. And, we were always very careful about how we used our own resources as founders. And Christian, while writing every line of code, he also played a pivotal role in business development. So he's a man of many talents. But
wow, you know how to pick the partners.
I know, right? That's what I'm here for. That's all I know how to do. So, point being, it was just due to limited resources. But now we've got an awesome team of developers and people who have taken over audio production and are leveling us up in that department as well. So it's a pretty exciting time for us right now.
Well, it's great that you've been able to grow this thing to this point, and it's an app I use. When you listen to an audio book, or in this case, when you listen to AUDM, an article on AUDM, AUDM, you have the choice of listening at the speed that it was recorded on, or at a slower speed, or at 1.25, 1.5, 2, and everybody who's listened to audio of any kind knows that you get these choices that offer the speed of the narration to vary as you want it. So here's my question to you. You are someone who's listened to a lot of audio books before this, I assume, right?
That's right, yeah.
You're a fan, I would imagine, of this. That's how this whole thing was hatched.
Exactly.
I want to know what speed you listen to these articles and other audio.
So me, it's 1x always for me on audiobooks, on AUDM. And like you said, a big part of it is I'm just such a big fan of the voices that we work with. I'll come across an audiobook once in a while where I won't really like the narrator, and I will either just stop listening altogether, or I may increase the speed to get through it. But with the narrators we work with, I am just a total purist, and I want to hear it exactly how they read it. I love that I can get through the content, and that, there's great utility in being able to, quote unquote, read a wired article when I'm driving. But I love how our narrators sound, and it's hard for me to imagine listening to anything at anything above 1x. Now, on the other hand, we have users who request speeds faster than 2x. So you kind of never know what people want. And if they're trying to get through 15 articles as fast as possible, then that's what they're going to do. But for me, we just a couple of days ago we released an article by Robert Caro in the New Yorker, and it was narrated by Grover Gardner, who read all of his LBJ books. And, I just can't imagine listening to anything like that at more than 1x. I just like to savor each moment. Yeah,
this is the subculture of audio narration offerings. You're describing sort of like, why would you take a great acting performance and watch it in a slightly faster speed than it was recorded? And so you're saying you savor the performance as well as the information, and for that reason, you just listen to it at the speed that it was recorded. I'm a 1.25 guy, so
there you go.
I like to, tip of the hat to the narrator, but I like to just, my time is a little limited, so.
Well, that's why the feature is there. But the narrators, we feel very lucky to work with them. They're all incredibly smart, incredibly talented. In fact, we hired one of them to oversee our audio production, Julia Whalen. She's the audiobook narrator who's entrusted with books like Gone Girl, and she has done a lot of work for us, and we wanted her to come work for us. So we convinced her somehow. I'm not really sure. We're waiting until she finds out that this is a terrible decision. But we couldn't be more thrilled to have someone like that on board with us.
A lot of the articles are narrated by women, and I think a lot of the audiobooks that I've heard, I'm not a huge audiobook fan, but a lot of them are read by the authors, or I've noticed they're read by men. So it was kind of a cool departure for me personally to hear so many women narrating these articles. In your stable, you have an equal number of men and women?
Yeah, and I couldn't agree with you more, especially on nonfiction audiobook titles. They are very typically given to male narrators, and we think that's a problem. So, there are wonderful female narrators out there, and again, we're just thrilled to be able to work with them and entrust them with this great nonfiction journalism.
So are you already looking ahead at the next startup you want to do, Ryan?
No, definitely not. I am, all in on this one. I hope this company lives for another 100 years. But, when you're an entrepreneur in a company like this, where you've just put so much blood, sweat, and tears into it, you don't think about what's next, or at least I don't. I just want to do everything that I can to make this be what I can do for the rest of my life.
Well, congratulations. I think it's a great user experience, and I really enjoy it. And honestly, this conversation just happened quite organically. When I was trying to get onto the app, I logged on, the communication contact that's provided for support, and I started my issue. And I'm used to dealing with a bot of some kind. And then, but the conversation seemed to be so human that I thought, I asked, "Are you a bot?" And the response came back, "No, I'm actually one of the founders," which I thought represented an opportunity to learn more about how the company was birthed. So,
yeah, I do many things, including customer support, which I find to be an extremely important part of my day, as does Christian. We both do customer support. We think it's important to be talking to our customers as much as we can. So, I'm glad we connected that way. It has been a nice organic start to the conversation, and I hope we get to continue it.
Autumn, it's AUDM. We'll have it on our website at edge-show.com, and it's also on all the platforms where the podcast is offered. If you just look in the description, you can see it there.
Thank you so much, Mark. Appreciate you having me on.
See you, Ryan.
Take care.
Mark Thompson is a huge loser. He loses bigly. His show, very bad, weak, soft. I don't recommend it. It's crap.
Hello, this is Morgan Freeman, and I want to thank you so much for all the ways that you support my friends on The Edge with Mark Thompson. You can listen on iTunes, Stitcher, Overcast, iHeartRadio, and many places that great podcasts are heard. That's an oxymoron, by the way. Great podcasts. Or you can go to their website, edge-show.com. Well, still haven't purchased a new domain name, I see.